the Gemara. Very, very much. What? All ZJ. I'm sorry. We thank ZJ for handing out the Gemaras tonight. Thank you, ZJ. So we're going to continue tonight. We're going to start the next parak. So if we have the Art Scroll Gemaras with us, if you're using the front, it'll be Chav Chesam at Beis. We're going to start at the Mishnah on the bottom on Chav Chesam at Beis. If you're using the back, and again, don't go all the way to the back because that'll be Maseches Midos. But in the back of Tamid, it'll be 28b3. 28b3, and we'll start with the Mishnah. So let's start. So the Mishnah, we said at the end of the first parak, the first piece of the avoda was the Kohen who was picked to do the first morning avoda was Trumas Hadeshen, taking some of the ashes off of yesterday's korbanos off of the Mizbeach with a silver shovel, bringing them down the ramp and depositing them on the ground in the Beis Hamikdash near the ramp. And we said one of the nisim that would take place on a daily basis is the ground that a stone floor would absorb those ashes. By the end of would be other items would be added with those ashes. We said that some of the ashes from the menorah and from the Mizbeach Hazav, from the golden altar from the previous day, that would also get placed there, and those would get swallowed. And then we also said that if a korban olav, a bird was being brought, the head and the innards of the bird would be placed there together. That whole bunch would be miraculously swallowed, absorbed into the ground. Let's see what happens next. So the Mishnah tells us as follows. Ra'u echem shiyarat. So the other Kohanim, we said the other Kohanim right now were either at the Beis Chavitin, and that's probably where they were according to most opinions, at Beis Chavitin. So again, if you had the map that's in there of the Beis Hamikdash, all the other Kohanim, while this Kohen is going to do Trumas Hadeshen, they're all still in spot number 10, which was called the Lishkas Chavitin, where they made the Chavitin loaves for the Kohen Gadol's korban every day. So they're all there while he was doing Trumas Hadeshen. So it says, Ra'u echav shiarad, when they would see that he descended from the Mizbeach, because again, when he went to the Kior, they couldn't see him because that was behind the ramp. But now that he comes down the ramp, they could clearly see that he's got the shovel filled with the ashes and he's deposited on the ground. So V'hem Ratzim Uvan, at that point, once he has deposited those ashes from the Trumas Hadeshen on the ground in the Beis Hamikdash, so they would start hustling. And what would they do? At that point, it was like boom, the snap goes off, and they all the Kohanim are going to be on duty for the day. They run to the kiyar, the laver, and that's where they turn the spigots so they could wash their hands and feet. What do they do next? They took shovels and forks. You know, if you've ever seen, a lot of times fireplaces have a set of these. There's like a shovel, it's like a fire pan, and there will also be like almost like a spoke, a fork thing. So they had special utensils like this for the Mizbeach. So what would happen? The Kohanim would take shovels and they would take those forks, and they would go up to the top of the Mizbeach. And what did they do? They had to look at what didn't get fully burnt during the night. Again, there was all sorts of limbs from yesterday's korbanos that had been placed on the fires on the Mizbeach, but naturally, some stuff didn't get burnt, either could have fallen off, whatever it was. So with using those hooks and the shovels, so what did they do? They would go up to the top of the Mizbeach. And the limbs of yesterday's korbanos and also the fats or other parts of the animal that didn't get totally consumed, didn't get totally burnt up, incinerated on the fire in the Mizbeach overnight. So what did they do? So it says, they would use the shovel and the forks to move them off of, and they would move them aside to a side point on the top of the Mizbeach. If there wasn't enough room, because let's say there was an exceptional amount, so then then they would take them off the top of the Mizbeach, but still on the ramp. And this was important, because once something had gone up on the Mizbeach, it's never supposed to come down if it hasn't been consumed. So the furthest they could do is take it onto the ramp. If you look at that picture, the diagram in the back in the article, 28b3, so you see that the Mizbeach had something called the Sovev. There was a ledge that went all the way around the Mizbeach. The Kohanim could actually walk on that. So it says, what did they do? If there wasn't room on the top of the Mizbeach because there were so many unburnt limbs and unburnt pieces of the animal, they would bring it down onto the ramp until the point where the Sovev was. So it would be an Amar or two down on the ramp. That's where they would drag that stuff. And we'll soon see why, because they had to make order again on the top of the Mizbeach, and then they would return all those stuff to burn them. So let's see what the Mishnah continues. And it says, Hechelu ma'alin be'efer al gab tapuach. Now, using those shovels that they have, they would organize all the ashes that were on the top of the Mizbeach, and they would set them up on top of a tapuach. We all know what's a tapuach? An apple. So what's the tapuach on the Mizbeach? There was a massive mound smack in the middle of the Mizbeach where all the ashes and the coals, everything was. And they would keep that mound growing and growing until it finally was too big, and that would be called Otsah Sadeshen, that they would remove that and take it special outside of the Beis Hamikdash, out into the outside of Yerushalayim, where they would deposit it. Not to be confused with Truma Sadeshen, which they would just take a small amount every morning off the Mizbeach and put it on the floor in the Beis Hamikdash. That Otsah Sadeshen is when the tapuach grew way too big. That's when they would take it out of Yerushalayim and deposit it out in the field in a special place. But what did they do? Now that they're on the top of the Mizbeach, they have to reorganize the Mizbeach. So it says, Echelu ma'alin be'efer al gab tapuach. So first they would clean up all of the coals and ashes. They would put that on top of the tapuach, on top of the mound of ashes and coals that was in the center of the Mizbeach. And it says, tapuach ba'emtza Mizbeach. This mound, again, it's a funny name, but I guess we're saying what it looked like. It resembled, there was like a big apple sticking up on the middle of the Mizbeach. So Tapuach HaYibamtza Mizbeach, there was always a big mound of ashes and coals in the center of the Mizbeach. Pa'amim. So now again, if you're using the back of the art scroll, we've just moved on to 28b4. So it says, Pa'amim shayu olav b'shlosh kishlosh me'os kor. There were some times that it was such a huge pile of ash could get to be 300 kor. The Mefarshim say that's a guzma, that's an exaggeration. It wouldn't get to 300 kor. That's just an incredible amount of volume there. But it's just a way of saying that it could hold a lot up there. With regalim, and specifically on the Yom Tovim, when you had everyone was being all of the regal, so you had so many people bringing korbanos, so the pile, the mound of ashes and coals would be huge. So it says, "V'regalim lo hayu medashnin also." And on Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuos, when it was such a large amount, so you may have thought, okay, let's get it all out of there. So it says, no, they specifically let it grow large and large. Why? It was an adornment. It was something which was considered decorative. The Mefarshim explained, what's pshat? I could think of decorations like, tinsel and colors. Why is that decorative? To show that it's used. What greater covet is there to show how big it is and how it's used, how Jews are coming from all over Eretz Yisrael and outside of Eretz Yisrael to be Olo Regel, and they're bringing korbanos, and that's why it's such a huge. What greater covet could there be to show how Klal Yisrael is joining together and being Mekayim the mitzvah, being Olo Regel? You think about it. You go to a library in a shul or in a yeshiva, and the Sfarim are in pristine condition. Okay, that looks nice, but what does that tell you? They're not being used. But when you see that they're being battered, okay, the backs, the bindings are beat up, but at least they're being used. That makes you feel good. Imagine you're the sponsor and you see okay, well, you might have to get a new volume now, but you feel good. It was being used. All those zechusim of the people who were learning from that sefer makes you feel good. It's totally different. But I remember my father-in-law of Shalom, when the family would be all coming together for Yom Tov, and he was kind of in charge. My mother-in-law would always be the one cooking in the kitchen. His job was always taking out the trash. So when he would take out the trash, it was filled. It was so heavy, and he'd be pulling it out. He used to joke and say, "Oh, kanai nahara." It made him feel so good that the trash was so filled and that there were so many people in the house, and that there was. So it was just funny. I always got a kick out of it. So I do that too, and it's a heavy trash. Oh, kanai nahara. That's what he would always. That's what he would always remark there. But that's what I think of when I see this Mishnah. It's saying that was a kavod, to know that so many people had come and were making use and bringing korbanos. That was a noi. That was an adornment. That was decorative for the Mizbeach. Mishnah continues and it says, Miyamav, and in his days, meaning there were days, in the days of the kahuna, now we're turning the page. In the front will be on Chavtas Amud Aleph. In the back will be 29a1. The Kohanim were never lax in terms when it got too much, and there was, I guess, someone who says, okay, now it's too much, we've got to get out of it. It never got messy. If it was too much, that would be called Hotzah Sadeshen. That's when they would totally trim down that mound, and they would take the ashes off out of Yerushalayim. They would deposit it in a respectful place out in the field, and that's what was done. But no one ever got lazy about this. It wasn't like, it never looked bad. It was never something that looked, that had fallen into disrepair. Mishnah continues, and it says, what happened after the Mizbeach top was swept clean and a clean mound was formed? So now what we're going to see is there was always, at the start of every day, they would set up 3 fire stations on the top of the Mizbeach, pyres, I guess you would say, Pyres. They would set up 3. There would be a main one right in front that the actual karbanos were going to be burnt on. That was the major one. And that was going to be in front of the tapuach, in front of the mound. Off to the left, which was going to be the corner there. So at the western corner, so at that point, there would be a smaller pyre. We're going to see that was set up, that they specifically used the best wood possible to make coals, that when the Kohen would have to go into the Kodesh section to burn Ketores, he should get his coals from that special pile that was lit on the Mizbeach. So it was a special pyre, small pyre made just for that. And then in the back, there was a third pyre, very small, that was just meant, it was almost like a ner tamid, that there should always be, it says, Eish Tukad, there should always be a fire burning on the Mizbeach. So if one of the others might go out, then you could relight it from that. So there would always be a smaller one in the back. So we're going to discuss, the Mishnah is not really going to talk about that back one. It's going to talk about the first 2. The major one that were burnt on, and then the second one that they used to create coals so they could burn the Ketores on the Mizbeach Hazav, on the golden altar that was in the Kodesh section. So let's see, now the Mishnah is going to tell us, what did that process look like? It says, Hechelu ma'alin b'gzirin. They started to bring up logs. Now it sounds like the Mishnah doesn't really specify any qualifications for these logs, and that's what's going to come up in a second. L'sader samaracha, in order to arrange and set up the pyre where they were going to set up for the karbanos. So first it's talking about the major fire pyre that would take place on the, we've set up on the Mizbeach. So Gemara says, V'chikol eitzim ksherim lamaracha. What do you mean? You didn't specify, you didn't give any qualifications. Is any log just fit? As long as it's wood, you're going to throw it up onto the maracha, onto this pyre? Give me some qualifications. So the Mishnah says, Ein kol eitzim ksherim lamaracha. Yes, all wood from all trees could be good for the Mizbeach. Chutz mishal gefen v'shal zayis. The only ones that they specifically did not use, and the Gemara is going to spell out why soon. It says was vines, meaning from grapevines, that's gefen, and also of shal zayis, from olive wood. They wouldn't use olive wood either. What's that? Oh, the Gemara is going to explain. So let's wait on that. The Gemara will get to that. The Gemara is going to explain that. How about
an Asherah tree?
What's that? I'm sorry, Michael, did you ask something?
An Asherah tree.
No, Asherah is
how about
a tree that we can't use at all. So Asherahs needed to be destroyed. Those don't go on the Mizbeach. But it's a good point. So let's see. So let's see. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah rather says, what was the most common wood that they would use? The most common woods that were used for building the fire on the Mizbeach was Merubio Shaltaena, branches from fig trees, also Shel Egos, or for nut trees. Egos usually in Halacha and in Gemara is referring to walnuts, but from nut trees, Vishal Eitz Shemen, or from trees that produce oil. Mefarshim explained it was some type of a cedar tree. It had some sap that was really, really conducive, really flammable. So that would make for some really, really good fire. And again, as far as why not grapevines and why not olive trees, we'll get to that. The Gemara is going to get to that soon. So now the Mishnah says, Cedar Samaracha Gedola. They would set up the big pyre, the major pyre that was right when you came up the kevesh, right when you came up the ramp, before you hit the mound, that would be the site of the major pyre. And he tells us, how did they set it up? Mizracha was the east side of the altar. So if you look at that picture, there's a bird's eye picture on the left side there on 29A2 of what the Mizbeach looked like in relationship to the Heichal and to the entrance, the antechamber of the Beis Hamikdash. You'll see, so in other words, what does that mean on the east? So that what that's going to mean is on the east is going, you're looking at this bird's eye view. So north is on top, east is going to be on the right. So he tells you as follows. So the way they set up the Ma'aracha, the way they set up the major pyre was that it was Mizracha, it was going to be on the east side of the mound. So you would come up the ramp, the mountain was going to be in front of you. The pyre, the major pyre, I was incorrect. I said that would be the first thing you hit. It's going to be to the east of the mound. That's where it would be set up. Correct. You come up the ramp and turn to the right. Exactly. So it would be like in the middle on the east, on the right there. So it says v'chazisa mizracha, and they would set it up that there should be like a window facing east, meaning when they would stack the logs, it wasn't just all stacked up one on top of the next. They would stack it up in such a way almost to build it that there was an open spot facing east, like a window, so the wind could come in, oxygen could come in and fan those flames. And it says, "V'roshe gezirna pnimim ha'yinogim b'tapuach." And the logs were long enough that the end of the logs, meaning going west, would actually touch the tapuach, touch the mound of the ashes and the coals that was in the middle of the mizbeach. V'reva chayi ben gezirim, and they didn't stack all the logs, mamish one against the other, so there was no room between them. They left room between them. And anyone who's built campfires, you see, this makes total sense. And Boy Scouts, they always taught us this, is that a fire needs oxygen in order to thrive. So you never want to put the logs smack one on top of the other, not leaving spaces. So that's what I was thinking of when I saw this there. Rabbi Chayyim ben Gezirim, he goes, and they left space in between the major logs, and this is also basics with fire building. Look at what he says. Lisa Misham. That's where they would put in the kindling. You can't just take a match to a log and expect it to light. You have to build your way up. You touch a match to the small, like the dried up pine needles, and then you work your way up to small branches, smaller, and then slightly larger, slightly larger, slightly larger. As the flame grows, eventually you can get a log to catch on fire. You can't just take a match and touch it to a log. It's not going to do anything. So he's telling you that this is what they were teaching as well here, is that there would be space in between the logs where they would put in smaller sticks, the kindling. That's how they'd get the fire going. 29A2, if you're in the back, and then they would get the nicest logs, which was from figs. So it says, Sidres Maracha Shnia, Lectoris, and they would set up a second fire, and that was a second pyre. That was the whole purpose of this one, was not to burn carbonos, but to produce coals that they could take into the Kodesh section for burning the Ketoris. And then it says, Keneged Keren Ma'aravis Dromis. Where was that second pyre set up? That was on the Ma'aravis Dromis. That was at the corner. That was the southwest corner. So again, if you look at that bird's eye map of the altar of the Mizbeach, the southwest corner, that's where that was going to be set up. Now, why? What was the reason? So it says, Mashuach mina Karen Klape Tzafan Arba Amos. It would be from that corner 4 amos north, meaning so not exactly at the corner, 4 amos north of it. So let's get. Why did they do it there? So if you look at that bird's eye view, 4 amos forward will still be in the doorway of the Heichal, going into the antechamber. And there's a limud from the pasuk seems to allude to the fact that the coals that are being used for the Ketoras that's going to be burnt in the Kodesh section should have been visible from the Heichal. So therefore, where that pyre was set up had to be positioned in a place on the Mizbeach top that would have been, if you were standing in the Heichal, you could look out and see that pyre. That they have a limit and a smachta from a pasuk that sends it in that direction. Now it says, how much coal did we want to produce on a daily basis for that? So it says as follows. It says, they put an amount of wood that if they would estimate, it could produce 5 saws of coals. That's how much wood that they would want to use. That at the end result would be 5 saws of coals. Now it says Shabbos, but if it was for Shabbos, they would add more wood for that second pyre. They wanted that it would produce 8 saws of coals. Why? Because on Shabbos, remember Shabbos was the day that they switched over the lechem apanim, that they took out the 12 loaves that were on the shulchan from last week, Shabbos, that were put on their last Shabbos, gave them to the Kohanim to eat, who were coming onto duty and were leaving duty. It was always on Shabbos, so they would split them, and they would put the new lechem apanim on. But when they took off the old lechem apanim, there was always 2 pazichin, there were 2 little bowls of levona, of frankincense, that was on the shulchan. So when they took those off, they would burn them as well on that pyre. So therefore, it said they wanted to have a slightly bigger fire on Shabbos because it had to produce the coals and still burn that the frankincense, the levona. All right, let's pause here at the end of there. We'll continue, God willing, tomorrow night. All right, we'll say a Kaddish Rabbanan. Rabbi Chanani ben Akash Amir Ratzak.
Question.
Torah mitzvah shinamar. Chafetz Laman Tzidko Yagdil Torah v'Yadir. Amen.